O King, my King, it is that time where I must update you on the state of the world. Well, as I see it, surely you must be looking too. But we're at a spot now where much has happened in October and November, and we have to make sure that we play the long game. And so here we go. 1. Much has happened in the last 3 months, and whenever we predict things, they don't always turn out as we might envision them, because this is a problem with hearing prophecy and actually seeing it come to pass. It always comes in a way that's unexpected, but it still fulfills the prophecy. But anyways, one thing that I'll mention, Father Oliveira, that's his pseudonym. I don't know what his actual name is. He's a Brazilian priest and a seer, and he predicted that 2024 would be full of war, and that people would be watching gruesome scenes of war as if from their television. Safe to say that's passing right now, as we all have access to social media, which is showing us, if we let it, gruesome images. 2. In 1968, there was a prophecy given by an old Norwegian woman, which had 4 phases. The first and second had to do with general degeneracy. The third had to do with the flooding of Europe with poor people from other lands. And then the next one was the war. Well, poor people have been flooding in for this crisis. We call it the refugee crisis, even though most of them aren't refugees, they're just migrants. This has been happening for 10 years now in Europe, in North America. And it's because these people are unassimilated, there's something more nefarious going on here. They want to try to dilute these cultures in order to enact more powerful global measures. We always have to be on guard for the devil working against the church and the devil working against unsuspecting souls to lead them to hell. And this is going to be one of the ways he does it. The demons know our attitude in the West when it comes to migrants. But then they paint what is called the devil's portrait. They don't paint a complete picture, they paint an incomplete picture, and when we fill in the blanks, they use our error to do so, our sense of error. And when we have error, we don't complete the picture properly, but they know we're going to not complete the picture properly. And so what'll happen is when these unassimilated people come into our territories, we're going to have a vicious reaction to it. And this is what she predicted, that people would start to treat these people as pretty viciously. Now, of course, it almost needn't be said, but many of these people are Muslim, and Muslims, they're 18, 20 plus years assimilated into their indoctrination. There's nothing, it would take almost as much time, barring miracles, to re-assimilate them into our societies and into our laws, because they come from countries with laws that are Muslim in nature. 3. One thing we must always be vigilant about, and I'm going to reference 3 different visions for this one, even though more of them said 4. Well, we'll say Blessed Elena Aiello had Russia coming and attacking the East, but we also have Aloy Erlmeyer's World War III, which fits in with the Norwegian woman's prophecy. Seredny, Our Lady of Seredny in Ukraine, and Our Lady of the Revelation given to the Italian seer, who was a Protestant turned Catholic, Bruno, I don't remember his last name, it's Cornicia or something like this. And they all predicted an Eastern coalition, and this Eastern coalition will be armies probably led by Russia, since Russia's national state and its economy is much healthier than it's been. Let's put it that way. 4. Now, in our church, we just had happen in October the Synod on Synodality. This thing attempted to create what is called the listening church. I guess the listening church is meant to be a church that wants to take suggestions from lay people and gather up a coalition of opinion and adjust its policies to be more friendly towards the public. I would call it the marketing church, because this is what marketing does. But I remember, even though this is it's not an official gospel, I read some of the sayings in the Gospel of Thomas. And I don't know if I would call this a forbidden book. It's simply a book. We can profit from it as lay people. That's all we do. See if we can profit from it, but we don't use it to change our theology. One of its sayings is, and I paraphrase this, is if a lion eats a man, then the lion becomes man, but if a man eats lion, the man becomes a lion. And this is to say that if lay people eat what is of God, they can become godly. But if those people who are meant to represent God eat what is of man, they're going to become worldly. And this is a danger we have on the synod. 5. Now, I have to make two distinctions, and every Catholic should know this. I call it bottom-up thinking and top-down thinking. Bottom-up is essentially discovering the universe from the sense of the self and your perceptions, and forming your perception based on your experience and your stimulus. And nobody is going to get to heaven with a bottom-up approach. It's just not going to happen. A top-down approach is when you try to understand the world through the understanding of something greater than you. So you can try to understand it through the lens of your father, or through the lens of a religion or a philosophy, or you can try to understand it through the revelation of God, which is what the Catholic Church is supposed to be, but hasn't been. Now, the Church is supposed to ask the Holy Spirit to direct it, but it's asking the people. This is a bottom-up approach. That, okay, we're going to worship God in a way that other people are going to suggest we do. This is disordered and corrupt. Bottom-up thinking is not going to serve one when it comes to heavenly or divine matters. 6. Now, there's an attitude that came out of the Vatican II documents where the Church decided it wants to open its doors to outsiders, almost as if almost like the feast, where they want to invite everybody in, and then basically the idea behind the feast is that they would kick out anybody that's not embracing the atmosphere, embracing the faith. However, what's really going on is it's like we're boats in the ocean, and our boat, the Catholic Church, is the greatest boat. But we have a pope, or we had a set of popes that wants to reach down and pull everybody into the boat. The problem is everybody wants to take the ocean with it. The ocean cannot come into the boat or it will sink the boat. So what will happen is if we have popes that continue to grasp at people and pull as if to try to pull them up, it may end up causing the boat to tip over and to fill it up with the ocean. This is the danger. And then we'll all be drowning, as we all have in modernist ideology. 7. We have one of the bishops, Bishop Strickland, was dismissed, unfortunately, and this caused another problem, that the grounds for his dismissal were simply confused or not present. And a lot of people on the traditionalist side of things, they're starting to detest the decisions made out of the Vatican, or they've long detested them. And the Vatican seems to detest any attitude that comes from the traditionalists, which is to lean on orthodoxy. And there's no reason not to lean on orthodoxy, so here's where the traditionalists have them. Now, unfortunately, when they make decisions that are motivated by invisible affairs, and this one most certainly was motivated by invisible affairs, they try to make things visible as though they're visible, but the problem is we see right through it, meaning they're still invisible. The purpose for his dismissal is still not known because the official reasons given don't hold up. And so this is just deepening the rift between the Vatican Church and the traditionalists, which is a danger to us all. 8. Now, we read Ezekiel 34 yesterday. I read it, and it reminds us of the state of the church now. Like, we're the sheep and we're getting lost on the hills and elsewhere, and we're all starving because we're not being fed by the shepherds. And it also reminds me of Our Lady of La Salette when she told the children, do you pray? When they asked, well, how are we going to survive if we can't get fed? And she asked, do you pray? Because the fruits of the earth will rise up. Well, we're like these lost sheep. We're getting abandoned by the church. And they think that the synod of synodality is going to recollect them, but it's not going to. These efforts are vain because, again, they're taking a bottom-up approach. But when they abandon those sheep that require the orthodoxy, that they're supposed to feed them, and they're not feeding them, these sheep are abandoning the church, and then they become abandoned by the world, or abandoned to the world. And then who knows what kind of things we're going to learn from the world when we're being denied food from the shepherds. 9. And so what we had happen in October is the arousal of the conflict between Israel and the Gaza Strip or Hamas. And I'll get more on this. What I can tell you, O King, is I'm going to give you some thoughts, and you're going to discern yourself what to make of this situation rather than telling you what to think of this situation. 10. Our war is a spiritual one. Whereas everyone else, there's a lot of people in the world that are at war because their spirit has already been decided. When there's a hardening of the spirit, war occurs because there is no softening of the spirit. Hearted heartness is imminent for disaster because with an unchanging people, you're just going to have like two asteroids imminent for collision, and they're going to collide. And in this case, this was an imminent collision. For Muslims have in their hearts a Muslim future, and Israel has in its heart an Israelite future. Neither of these futures compromise, and so we have imminent war. Whereas if we have divine revelation, we have the future. 11. Rebel groups might be indoctrinated by foreign interests to manufacture conflict. We saw this happen with the Hezbollah in Libya, I think they're called, and ISIS. Or some people call them ISIL. Whatever the case is, these people were funded and armed by their opposition in order to raise up rebellion to take down another opposition. And we can't be asleep to such things happening, especially in our time where what we see is but a screen someone else wants to show us. As I said before, the devil's portrait. 12. We had the Industrial Revolution occur in the 1800s, and then after that, we had something called the Modernist Revolution, which is when you rely on machines to build you things, it's going to tear down the labor of society and restructure it. And then it turns into a marketing society. And one of the problems with our marketing society is that now that supply is exceeding demand and it's going to make products more and more worthless, they have to manufacture demand in order to meet with supply. Well, war is in great supply, but not much in demand, and so they have to increase the demand in order to justify the supply. This is something we have to fundamentally understand about our times, is that much of our opinions are manufactured by the media. And the media is owned by whom? Who wants to manufacture these things and why? It's all marketing. 13. Now, the French Revolution is basically the precursor of the Industrial Revolution, which I don't know if this is the saddest coincidence in history, but so it is. The irony of the French Revolution is that it happened because people were war-weary between the Catholics and the Protestants. And because they were war-weary, they decided, no, we hate religious wars. They didn't want their children to go to war for religious causes, which far exceed peasantry, but now we're going to war for causes of other religions, which is the opposite of noble. It's utterly wild. And so, because they hated religious infighting, they hated war. The problem is when the revolution happened, they got more war. They got way more war. Napoleon went off and attacked all of Europe and tried to take Russia too. And ever since then, it's been non-stop fighting. After the Napoleonic Wars, we had the war between Russia and France. And then after that, we have World War I. And then after that, we have World War II. The most catastrophic wars in history. So the French Revolution just awoke a spirit of war, even though it was trying to put it to bed. 14. And so we have to conclude that a war that is fought in the spirit prevents wars that are being fought in the flesh. And we think of St. Augustine, the confessor, who often had public debates with the, I don't remember what they were called, the Donatists, and I remember he was part of another school of thought at the time. But when he had these public debates, it prevented conflicts, because when these debates occurred, it caused people to form and correct their opinions. But we don't have this occurring these days because religions have all a wall built between them. In St. Augustine's time, there was no Islam. And Islam is a very hardening of hearts. And so we have to conclude that the people going to war these days, material war, are those with the most hardened hearts. 15. And so, in 2024, as Father Oliveira predicted, we will probably see a lot more scenes of war on social media. I try to mute them or prevent myself from seeing them by blocking the users that show these things, but everyone must do as they wish, as long as they keep spiritually vigilant. Now, I don't need to see these things to know that they're happening, because I feel we are, as Catholics, especially the traditional sort, awake to these matters due to our being well versed in prophecy. 16. The losses of fighting men in Ukraine are staggering and catastrophic. Not only have many young men migrated from the country, but they've lost many people in the war. And these figures they're not quite at 1 million on both sides, but they're approaching it. And it seems that we have hardened hearts on both sides of this conflict as well. So we have to know that it is not, even if we hear little from it due to the conflict between Israel and Hamas and the rest of Palestine, we have to not fall asleep to it. This country is in a crisis. 17. Now, I have an effect I labeled called the tilling of the soil. What happens in countries that have been abused and maligned, sort of like a person who's been oppressed by a demon and almost to the point of possession. That person who gets cleansed of the demon, due to their understanding the nature of evil, is now susceptible to seeing the nature of good, really good. And often these people who are possessed, they become nuns or they take on holy orders, and they become the greatest fighters against these matters because they know full well how much they were oppressed by the demons. We have the same thing that happens when people are oppressed by a form of government, that we have a tilling of the soil, so to speak. And when they have been oppressed long enough, they start to develop a rebellious attitude against those things. Therefore, those nations who are communist right now, or who see much conflict, they may well be the first to be the kingdoms of the places of the kingdoms of heaven on earth. So places oppressed by communism are tilled soil ripe for Catholic harvest. 18. Now, because we see what we see on social media, because the pictures are vivid, because the stories are vivid, again, we're having the devil's portrait painted for us. We have to use critical thinking in these matters, and we cannot develop any sense of critical thinking until we become attached to our faith. This is how we fight modernism. We have to dispel the illusions everybody else tries to cast on us. 19. Fight then, O King, the war of the Spirit with a powerful prayer life. This is all I have to say. 20. We have a new economic coalition building up called the BRICS, which is traditionally the BRIC has been Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And a lot of people invested in these things when the housing market collapsed in 2008. Well, the BRICS it added South Africa, but it's going to add even more nations to its, I'll call it, economic constitution. It wants to create an economic entity that rivals the US dollar, which is basically, at this point, we might call it the oil dollar, because oil is what maintains the supply chains The reason why we have inflation is because the supply chains are becoming more and more unaffordable due to lacking oil, due to a quote-unquote green agenda. Now, because the West is abandoning oil due to this weird agenda, this opposing entity is going to gain in strength and become formidable. And so we're warned of this coalition of the East. Well, put 2 and 2 together, my king. 21. Now in other nations we have, they call them far right. I hate the word. I hate the term. I don't like the terms right or left, political right or left, because it's a false dichotomy. But I'll call them libertarians. This is more accurate. Libertarian revolutions are happening, whereas we would call them democratic states, they're starting to vote for basically the grenade candidate. The grenade candidate is throw a bomb in the buildings of the government and blow them up. And these grenade candidates are going to get more and more popular. Why? Because people they're fed up with globalism. And so they want their sovereignty back. 22. Now, of course, I mentioned earlier that the church, with its synod of synodality, is taking a bottom-up approach. Rather than looking to divine revelation, it's looking to the people to guide its masses, which will render their masses more and more and more ineffective at creating saints and people going into holy orders. But we've had this crisis happening since the Vatican II revolution, so this is to no surprise. It's just par for the course. Now, people in these countries who have a bottom-up approach, who are voting for the grenade, well, everybody's just going to continue. It's going to perpetuate. Whereas these two sides hate each other, even though it's a false dichotomy, they hate each other. They're building a greater and greater wall between each other, and they're voting for the biggest grenade they can to blow up each other's side. So this is basically a war fought through the ballot box. And many of these grenades aren't really kings or rulers, they're just reckless. And no leader can justifiably rule his country in a reckless manner. Madness, it does a lot of damage, but it doesn't last long. 23. And so, O king, I have to stress, you have to find silence from the noise. And make sure you're always listening to God. Do not be the listening church. Be the one that listens to God. That this is the true listening church, the church that listens for the Holy Spirit. Doesn't listen to the people other than to transmit the Holy Spirit to the people. And so, we have this concept called the Couch of Solomon. This is from Mary of Agreda in Mystical City of God. The Couch of Solomon was, of course, Our Lady, who is wisdom incarnated. Wisdom is always referred to as a she. Of course it is. And now that we have this wisdom incarnate, you have to rest your head on her. Why? Because behold thy mother. Jesus would often spend periods of time to himself praying in the mountains because he needed to spend time with his Father, and he also had to spend time with his mother. This is to recharge him, and you, O king, must be recharged, or you will begin to fall sway to the illusions of the world and yourself be drawn into political madness. We must keep sober. And the more sober we keep ourselves, the more God will ordain us with the crown of heaven rather than giving us crowns from earth. We don't want the crowns from earth, we want the crown of heaven. We do our jobs on earth in order to gain the crowns of virginity or the crown of righteousness or the crown of life. These are the crowns that matter.